Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. We've already started talking, Sister Elizabeth and I. You're listening to In the Company of Charity podcast. I'm Sister Liz, and I'm here as always with my co-host and sister friend, Sister Elizabeth. So, welcome.
Welcome to you too, and thank you. So I'm going to say it again. Do you not love this episode?
I'm
Absolutely in love with it. I can't stand it.
adorable,
Yeah,
amazing, inspiring, all the things.
yeah. So this is the fourth in the series of Carville, about Carville in Louisiana, the Hansen's Disease Memorial Museum, about the experience of the king of the armadillos, Walter Chin, and his daughter, who just saw this story. I mean, realized, her dad was the man he is because of this, and because he was at the Leprosarium, which they were called then, and it made him the man he is. And so, just the last three have kind of built us up to this episode, I think. So
Yeah.
I don't want to give away a lot of what we talk about in this one, but it's gold. It's just gold as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and having the sisters there is just another layer of awesomeness. You can hear one of the sisters say, like, I found my vocation at Carville. And I think every one of us, like, I wouldn't be a daughter of charity without my brother's keeper. I wouldn't be a daughter of charity without Emmitsburg. These places and experiences that are just absolutely crucial touch points of God's call and mercy towards us. And
Yeah.
it's just neat to hear that come through from another sister's experience.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I think the whole episode just kind of pulls it together. There are two more sisters, and we're just having a little difficult time. They're older sisters, and we're trying to coordinate interviews with them. So we may be having to do them separately. But so just anyone listening, pray for that so we can get Sister Rosalind England and Sister Carol Padilla on as well, who were also at Carville. But these four really kind of help to frame the picture of, one man's story of being at Carville, but also the way in which the sisters impacted his life and the sisters' experience of being there themselves. And it's just a really beautiful story, I think, of just the generosity of the sisters. As we said in one of the episodes, they thought they maybe would get 10 to volunteer, and 100 volunteered, and there were hundreds, who filtered in and out of Carville, and many more visited who were living in the area. So yeah, it's just a great story of the resilience of a place like this, just how much the sisters, created a home in the midst of such tragedy and fear for these young people, basically, who were brought there, separated from their families. So much
We
in
love
it.
it. You're going to love
Yeah.
it. And just to have that point of reflection, um, who are the people? Where are those places in your life and in my life that God broke through, and spoke to us and moved our life in a way that maybe we could have never anticipated? And that's the way our God is, a God of surprises.
Yeah, find your vocation. It's out there.
Yes. All right, enjoy the episode, guys.
Hi, it's Sister Elizabeth, and you're listening to In the Company of Charity, the podcast of the Daughters of Charity, and I have quite a collection of friends with me today. We are continuing our series on the work of the Daughters of Charity. When we were in Louisiana, we were working with patients who had, at the time, what was called leprosy, is now Hansen's disease. And we have some of the sisters who were at Carville, and we still have Wendy Chin-Tanner who's with us, the author of King of the Armadillo, and we have the King of the Armadillos, Mr. Walter Chin, who's here by kind of remote, and so we'll try to get everybody's voice in. We'd like to start with Sister Mary Louise Stubbs, who was at Carville in the 1970s. And then we're just going to work through each person because we have quite a few here. And we'll introduce each person and give them an opportunity to talk a little bit about their experience and then see where our conversation goes. We've had incredible conversations about Carville, and I'm so glad that today we get to talk to some of the sisters who have had experience there. So, Sister Mary Louise, we're happy to have you on the podcast today. You are a friend of the podcast. You've talked to us before about international project services, and today we're talking about your experience at Carville. So tell us, when were you there? What was your experience? And just anything you want to tell us about that time.
Well, I would not be a daughter of charity if it wasn't for Carville. I was working in a med lab and very interested in research. And someone talked about this great research center when I was in high school, when I was in the lab. And I said, "Oh, can I get the address? I'd like to see if I can get a job there." And that sneaky nun gave me the address of the Daughters of Charity. And I started following up on the daughters and became a daughter of charity. And Carville was my very first mission. So I was sent there as a very, very young sister. I was about 20. Um, and they sent me to work in the laboratory, and they wanted me to work on the clinical areas also, because I don't think they really wanted me to be a scientist. They wanted me to be a nurse. So being a very obedient young sister, that's what I did. So I worked both in the lab and in the clinical areas, and I'd worked for about a month when they discovered I wasn't a citizen. I'm Canadian. I wasn't a citizen, and it's a federal hospital. And they're going, "Oh my God, we've had this woman on the payroll, and she's not a citizen. And what are we going to do?" So they quick turned me into a volunteer, and that volunteer position was one of the very best experiences in my life. And I'll tell you about that. But first of all, I got to tell you about the friends I met. The individuals that were there as patients, as families, as employees, and as military people, because it was quite a combination, really worked together, and it was like a small town. It was really very lovely, and some of my best friends I've ever had were in Carville as most of them as patients, because that's where I spent all my time. I got an overview of the whole place and how to care for people who were having health issues. I was only going to be there a year because I was a young sister, but it was really very significant. The people who had some disabilities because of the disease, some people got disabilities after a while. At that point, they didn't have the medicines for it, but now they do. It wasn't too much longer after the 70s that they got the medicines. And one of my most wonderful experiences was that when I went to get my American citizenship, the whole courtroom was filled with patients because they were getting their citizenships. But there was such a prejudice against the people and such a fear of the disease, which was so silly. But I didn't want to say hello to them, and they're like not looking at me. They're very purposely not looking at me because they didn't want to be outed as someone from Carville. So we came back to the hospital afterwards, and everybody cheered. It was very nice. I did end up, because of that experience, going into nursing and have been in healthcare the rest of my life. But that was a few years ago in the 70s. And I have never forgotten that experience. I have never lost my love for those people. And as I said, some of them became very, very good friends of mine. So it was a joy, an absolute joy to be there.
That's great. It's I didn't realize that is where you found your vocation.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
I
Um,
never met a daughter of charity until that.
wow. Wow, what a place to have that experience, right? With those who are suffering, and as Wendy, who I'll call in now, and knows, the Daughters of Charity give our lives for those who are poor, those who are suffering and vulnerable, and so to find that place yourself is just great for the Lord to have sent you there. So I'd like to bring in Wendy Chin-Tanner, again, the author of King of the Armadillos, and her dad, Walter Chin. I was just wondering if you had any questions or reactions to Sister Mary Lou's story.
Thank you, Sister Elizabeth, and thank you, Sister Mary Lou, for that beautiful recollection. I just love the way in which, even in the 1970s, which is about 20 years after the book takes place, which takes place from 1954 to 1957, there was still such a pervasive sense, on the one hand, of the community of Carville, which was a beautiful thing. But on the other hand, the stigma that was on the outside of the fence, on the other side of the fence, that is, the stigma that the patients there still felt, even when they were in a courthouse getting ready to become American, getting ready to be indoctrinated into this beautiful next stage of their life, they were still afraid to be outed. And that tells me that part of our mission here today is so much about destigmatizing this illness.
And even today, I work with many locations where people have Hansen's disease in, in Thailand, in Colombia, in Nigeria. And the stigma is still there. But what's very interesting is people that won't come near the patients. If we happen to build a new school or put in a new clinic in the village, everybody else comes because they like to work with the sisters. So I think it may be lessening. And so many of the children have no sign of disease at all because, they've got the medicine. So it's so many of those diseases, the multiple diseases where people are afraid, makes it so hard because they get isolated, and the isolation is terrible. So it's not a past problem, it's a current problem as well.
I have certainly found that to be the case in everything that I'm hearing since I've published the book, in all of the healthcare professionals who have written to me or whom I've met. It's the same story over and over again, that even today in 2024, people are still suffering from the lack of treatment as a result of the fear of being labeled as a quote unquote leper. So, one of the things that I think we're doing here in talking about elevating and shining a light on the beautiful history of Carville is this achievement that you all participated in, this achievement of building a community at Carville and building a place where people were not only healed physically, but they were healed emotionally and spiritually as well.
Yes, I must say that the Sister of Charity was a great part in healing my disease and others, and also the church also, because I joined the Protestant church. They gave me lots of encouragement to do whatever I can. I love to sing, and they heard me singing along the hallways of the Carville Hospital, and the pastor somehow arranged to have piano, voice lessons, and for me at the church once a week, and that was great. And the sisters, every year, one of the sisters was a chief musician in organizing the annual Christmas pageant, in which I participated. And the sister also conducted and played the piano at the same time. So the sister was a great help in healing my body and the spirit.
Thank you so much. I'd like to, I think, call in Sister Loretto Gettemeier, who had visited Carville. You were not missioned there, but you were at Donaldson, Louisiana. Tell us about that experience of visiting Carville.
I was there certainly before Sister Mary Louise. Because Donaldsonville was my first mission, and I went there in 47. I was there from 47 to 56. So it would have been the earlier years. But when we went across the river to visit our sisters, I guess I was always impressed by their wonderful hospitality and their beautiful, beautiful care of their patients. Um, they're all of the nurses were sisters at that time. Everybody was a daughter of charity, and they went back and forth from the sisters' home to the colony by bicycle. So they traveled by bicycle, and as Sister Mary Louise said, Carville was like a little town. It had its own movie theater. It had its own golf course. It had its own baseball teams. It had its own Mardi Gras ball with the king and queen. And I remember just all of those events that they had at Carville that made them like their own little town, their own little city. And we know the story about one of them who was the editor of their newspaper, who fell in love with one of the other patients. Remember that story?
The Martins.
Betty Martin, I think, was the patient. Um, uh, but it was always happy and a joyful visit when we went to Carville. We were allowed to go visit some of the patients. We weren't allowed in all of the spaces because we weren't on staff and we weren't nurses. But we were allowed to go down and talk with them. We went into some of their rooms where I remember going into one room and the patient sang and sang and sang for us. It was just happy. I know it was a terrible thing to be exiled to Carville, but the sisters made it a happy place for them. That was my impression in just going over and visiting Carville.
You were there till 1956 visiting, and Walter, you arrived in 1954. And so, Sister Loretto, you may have actually heard Walter singing, since that was one of the things he discovered his time there. You at least might have passed each other in the hallways. So it's kind of like those 6 degrees of separation, right? That may never have known it, but you never know how you may find up serendipitously connected again. And we also have with us today Sister Ellen Kron, who has a kind of a different connection. So, Sister, can you tell us a little bit about your connection?
I'd like to maybe share a piece of history when I was on the provincial council, and in reading and working with the sisters in Carville, I came across documents from the very beginning of Carville in the 1800s, when it was just kind of a swampy leper colony and they put people on barges from New Orleans. But that the Daughters of Charity sent a letter out to all of the sisters asking for volunteers, that this was considered a different type of service. And it's at a time and an era of the Daughters of Charity where you were simply assigned of where you would go on your next mission. But for Carville, a letter went out to all of the sisters in the province, which extended from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And over 110 sisters responded that they would volunteer. And from those 110, 10 were selected to serve at Carville. And that always struck me of the generosity and the spirit of the Daughters of Charity from the 1800s to present day. So that after Katrina, part of the whole saga of the Daughters of Charity in Carville and in New Orleans was, this is a time for the Daughters of Charity to step up, not to step out. That this is an area and this is an era of a new modern day of courage that is needed in very, very difficult circumstances. So that's very big picture in terms of my involvement in Carville. As a college student, I was not a Daughter of Charity. I was a sociology major, and we went on a field trip to Carville to study it. as a closed social group. And one of our classmates toured us. He had said he had been there many times, and we studied Carville. We saw the sisters in their white habits on those bicycles, but we understood how people organize themselves and who had been stigmatized, and how do you build your spirit of resilience, and how do you organize yourself in what in essence is a federal facility. And while you're not officially a prisoner, psychologically you are. At the end of our very interesting and informative day, as we were getting in cars to go back to Baton Rouge, our classmates said, "I'm not going with you because I live here." So we knew him by his name, not by his label. So it was quite a lesson for 20-year-olds that our own classmate was a patient at Carville in the 1970s. And we've been going to school with him for this whole semester. So it was very personal and a realization of the unfortunate power of stigmatization that by the 1970s was no longer necessary. And it was a time of desegregation, destigmatization, just, our society as a whole. And I would just add that over the years, I've met sisters from the former Northeast province, from New York, who said they read a book about Carville, and that was their inspiration to enter the Daughters of Charity. Sister DeSales Provencher, who was from, I think, Wisconsin, she spent her life at Carville, was buried here in St. Louis, but her relatives, her nephew asked, and there is a headstone in the cemetery at Carville with her name, because she gave 90% of her community life to Carville, and that was her mission, that was her calling. In New Orleans, we would take vocation groups on a field trip to Carville, and they would watch a movie about Carville. We would go visit it as really just part of trying to introduce people to the spirit of the Daughters
beautiful.
of Charity.
Yes, I love hearing these recollections. Sister Loretto, I bet you did hear my dad. My dad was being humble. He didn't just take piano lessons and voice lessons and participate in the choir. He was something of a star at Carville. He came to his musical studies late, and in fact, going to Carville gave him an educational opportunity in that regard that he would not have had access to had he stayed in New York City, which is interesting. So it was very enriching for him in many ways. But he discovered once he started taking lessons that he had a gift for music, which I kind of amplified in my novel. The character Victor, who is inspired by my dad, is something of a prodigy. And my dad gave a recital at LSU while he was at Carville. He was very prominent in all of the pageants and musical celebrations, which you all know were really abundant at Carville, and which were part of what Sister Ellen, you were talking about earlier, about the kind of joie de vivre and the celebratory nature of the culture of Carville that I think was really essential to not only helping patients survive their affliction, but to be alive, to have full lives within Carville, regardless of whether or not they were able to go home at any point. So I also love what you said, Sister Ellen, about the integration that was going on at Carville. It was a very progressive place, really ahead of its time. When my dad was there in the 1950s, of course, the South was segregated, but Carville was integrated. The school was integrated. The living quarters were integrated. So it was really something.
My piano progression was not good yet, I started piano maybe in the 1950s, 56. And then after my recital was in 57 or 58. So I guess she wouldn't know that I had a recital.
I see. So my dad had to have ulnar nerve surgery since the illness affected his nerves in his hands and his arms. And it was actually as a result of that surgery that he got piano lessons as a form of physical therapy initially, and then discovered quite serendipitously that he was gifted. Well, his hands are beautiful, and I grew up with music in my house. And in fact, when my dad left Carville, one of the things that he brought home with him to New York City were all of the music books that his teacher gave him. And so I learned on many of those.
It was a private lesson in the chapel, in the Protestant chapel. A student from LSU came over, a music student. Yeah. He came over weekly to teach me voice and piano lessons and some of music theories and composition. So, yeah.
I want to share something about the doctor who did the hand surgeries. Walter, do you remember Dr. Brand, B-R-A-N-D? Dr. Margaret Brand would work with eyes, and Dr. Paul Brand worked with hands. And they were so superb that there were, and I worked the clinics with them sometimes, but the thing that he always told people, and he would fix hands like nothing you've ever seen. He would hold out his hand like this, and you can see my hand is out flat. And he said, if you lose the ability to use your hand, you will always be begging. If we can fix your hand, you will always be able to take care of yourself. So his whole thing was releasing these tendons and stretching them differently so that people could hold something. So it makes sense that they did the music for PT.
Yeah. Wow. It's really so amazing. And speaking of just the amazing things that were happening there, the other connection Sister Loretto has is that she knew Sister Hilary Ross and met her in Japan, not in Carville, but met her in Japan. And can you tell us a little bit about that relationship, Sister Loretto?
Yes. You know, as we said before, it's a federal hospital, so the sisters were required to retire at 65. Sister Hilary Ross was in the pharmacy at Carville, and she said, "Well, I'm not ready to be put on the shelf and do nothing. I want to go on the missions." So Sister Hilary applied not to our visit. Well, maybe she applied to the Visitatrix. I don't know, but she really applied to Paris to our Superioress General and said, "I want to go to the missions." So they sent her to Japan. So on her 65th birthday, Sister Hilary Ross arrived at our mission in Wakayama, Japan. And she was she was fabulous. She was a wonderful, wonderful companion. But one of the first things, I guess maybe she was there a couple of years, and she was invited to come to Washington, D.C. to receive a very distinguished honor, which was the Damien Dutton Award for her research in leprosy, Hansen's disease. And besides that, she was visited by, I would say, numerous physicians or people in research. They would come to our little mission in Wakayama, Japan, to visit Sister Hilary and ask her to write a chapter in a book they were publishing, so her research could be known and profited by throughout the world, not just in little Carville, but throughout the world, because of her wonderful reputation in what she had done for the patients. In Wakayama, she also then had charge of the pharmacy. Well, they did. Our little Wakayama, Japan town did not have anything like the medications, the pills, or the capsules that they would have in the U.S. So Sister Hilary would order the powders. And I can remember seeing her taking a little something and pounding together all of these medications and making her own medications for our physically handicapped children. And she got along fabulously with the Japanese doctors, even though she couldn't speak Japanese. We would translate for her, but she had one phrase she used all the time, no matter what it was. She used the same phrase, "Aso desu ka? Aso desu ka?" It means in Japanese, "Oh, is that so? Is that so?" And that's what she responded to everything. But she did, as I say, she did wonders for our physically handicapped children in getting them the medications that they needed. Um, she also, as famous as she was, not only in the US and throughout the world, but she was simple to live with. She was just like an old shoe. You could just sit down and talk to Sister Hilary. She was just a wonderful companion to live with. She had a great sense of humor. She told wonderful stories. We heard stories after stories. And Sister Hilary stayed in Japan as the pharmacist at the physically handicapped children's hospital until her death.
Sister Loretto, you were kind of famous as Sister Hilary was receiving awards. She was a simple somebody, a simple sister in her life, and going along. And that's why these episodes for me is so important, because we do tend to be very quiet. And other books I've read and people we've talked to, that the story of the sisters is there. But I think in this day and age, when um, we still are facing issues of racism and inequality and stigmatism. What happened during COVID was, to Chinese Americans, in the stigmatism that occurred, isn't that far away from us. It's still with us. And to know that we have a legacy within the Daughters of getting past that and being able to create communities that were equitable, communities that were not burdened as much by racism. And you've all spoken about Carville as this kind of enclave, a community within the wider community. I mean, right outside the walls was, Jim Crow laws and much racism. But the beauty and the blessing of this relationship, we would know the federal government could open itself up to let this kind of relationship happen at that particular time as well. Um, that that is so much a part of the legacy as well, not just about our service and we were great there, but that this, I think, for Wendy and Walter, for me too, it become, we're part of a family now. The um, patients who were at Carville and their families. Wendy, as Walter's daughter, is a part of that legacy. And I think that's the other theme that keeps coming out to me, is that a situation like this creates community in a much wider spectrum.
Absolutely. Not only am I here, but I am who I am because of Carville, and I'm very grateful to them. And I would also like to say that in addition to the racism and the stigma against people with disabilities, essentially, and people with illness, there was also sexism and misogyny. And I think it's really important to highlight that all of you and all of the sisters who participated in not only the treatment side of Carville, but also the lab side of Carville, you're women of science, and that should be celebrated.
I've just enjoyed listening and learning more because I know my adventures and I know it changed my life. And I know I wouldn't be a daughter of charity without Carville. But to hear the other stories, how many thousands and thousands of stories are out there that could be shared? And then the people I'm working with now in those 7 different countries who have Hanson's, they've all got their stories too. So I think stories need to be told.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I agree. And Sister Ellen, you had mentioned the first 10 sisters who went to Carville, but there were over 130, I believe, who over the years were missioned in and out of Carville over those years. And can you tell us a little bit about what the how it ended, or ending is probably not the right word, but how did the involvement of the Daughters of Charity progress and then begin to wane in towards the end? They didn't either need to be there or couldn't be there anymore.
So two things occurred: that some years prior, regulations had changed and people living at Carville were offered an opportunity and offered a choice. A number of people living at Carville were quite up in their years. Other people were not. So it was no longer a confinement, and that the federal government offered people the choice to leave, and there was a means of financial support. But there were others who were also offered the opportunity to remain for the rest of their days. So a number of people chose to remain at Carville, and if and when they needed skilled care or more care than was provided at Carville, they went to live at a nursing home in the Baton Rouge area. So our sisters, the pledge and the desire was to remain at Carville until the very last person was living there. And so along, given that, and we had Sister Dorothy, who had been there for years and years and years, very personal relationships with those who had chosen to live at Carville. It was a handful of people, but people nonetheless, and people very important and near and dear. So she was the remaining sister. We Daughters of Charity, given that we live in community, she then was moved to New Orleans, but on weekends she went back to Carville. She was the sacristan in the church, and she tended and visited those few people still living at Carville. That went on through Katrina, which of course was disruptive to everything and everyone. And there's a couple of asides about that whole Katrina and the use of Carville's properties. But nonetheless, then Sister Dorothy herself became ill.
Sister Ellen mentioned that she was on the council when Carville closed. Well, that council sent me to Carville to help Sister Dorothy close the mission. So we did. We packed up a lot of things and things like that. One day, Sister Dorothy came to the little house where Sister Dorothy and I were living, and she said, I just experienced something. And she said, I went into our chapel at Carville. It was empty, but I heard the choir singing. She said the music was beautiful, and I heard the choir, our sisters and the patients, were singing. She said, I was transfixed. I couldn't leave. And that's the story she came home and told
Yeah,
us.
it definitely is a place that not ghosts but saints still wander about. I'm sure. I'm sure.
I would love to hear a bit about what happened during Katrina and how Carville played a role in, I suppose, maybe housing people, is my guess. I would love to hear about that, Sister Ellen.
Well, given that it was federal property, and this was certainly a federal disaster, it not only housed people, but it also housed the morgue and all the forensic pathologists, and that was where people who had died in Katrina, their remains were there for identification. It was private enough, inaccessible enough that in this case, it was invaluable. It was out of the city so things like electricity and water, all those essentials were available. But I took many a flight or drove before the planes were going back to New Orleans, but you'd have to fly to Baton Rouge, and there were forensic dentists, on those flights, and they were not going to New Orleans. They were going to Carville to help with the identification of Katrina's victims. And they would just say an unnamed site, not too far from New Orleans. But Carville, once again, serving in some pretty tough
Wow, thank you so much for adding that piece to the story. That's amazing.
Oh, very interesting. Yes, very, very interesting. In fact, my 9 years spent in Carville made me what I am today. And Carville gave me a lot. And after I left Carville, I want to give back something. So I even applied for Peace Corps, but they rejected me on that. And later on, there was a domestic Peace Corps called VISTA, Volunteer in Service to America. They accepted me. They accepted me, and I was thrilled that I could be serving people. And they put me into drug addict social service. So I counsel the drug addict, help them to get started when they finish the treatment, get them housing and medical care. And I was very much into that.
I think we could go on for a very long time. We've discovered that with each episode. So I just wanted to see if we could just go around once, just any last comments or reflections. Sister Mary Louise, would you like to start us off?
Yes, I think that Carville has been a focus point of prayer in our lives. Those of us who have had the privilege of being in Carville, working in Carville, knowing the people, knowing the physicians, what a little treasure place, as hard as it was for people. What a treasure place. Without the research that those physicians did, we wouldn't have the medicine yet, I'm sure. So it really was a focal place where the lights all kind of came together. And I think that we need to thank God for it, and we also need to thank God for the privilege of being able to witness some of this.
I mean, I want to say that my dad was rejected by the Peace Corps because he was at Carville, because of his medical record. But I think also because of Carville, he found the will and the way to still serve. And that spirit of service is something that comes from the community that he grew up among in Carville. And that was certainly a value that he parented me with. So the legacy goes on, and I feel so pleased to be able to commune with this, what I consider to be part of the extended Carville family here today. So thank you so much for coming on and for giving me that opportunity to meet more of my Carville family.
This podcast is creating a very close communication among the sisters who served and all the people who worked at Carville.
Yeah, and we're so grateful for you for telling your story. It's still, as Sister Mary Lou was saying, some parts of the world the stigma still exists, and so to have an opportunity to see that life happens and great families are formed, and the gifts that were part of Cargill can be the gifts for everyone, and that the stigmatism needs to end. Really is a witness. I think that you're a witness to that. So we really appreciate your telling your story and letting it be public.
Would hope for the whole global community that there would no longer be a need for Carvilles, that to the idea of stigmatizing and segregating people because of a disease or because of the color of your skin or anything, the hope and the goal would be that it served its time, but it was time, and thank goodness the world could not have to have people exiled or separated anymore.
Well, my last word, I thank you for letting me be a part of this wonderful conversation about Carville, a very unique mission, and certainly the sisters who serve there. I don't know if unique isn't the right word, but wonderful and inspiring and dedicated women who loved every inch of Carville and the patients. Every one of them had a desire to care and love the patients that were at Carville. So I just thank you that you allowed me to be a part of this conversation today. And we hope that the spirit of Carville lives in our hearts and in the hearts of our patients too. Thank you.